for, first of all, for the invitation to come to Thailand, to Professor Natana and to the Center of European Studies, and also for the invitation to be here with you today to talk about, well, about Europe and Russia in this century. But first of all, well, we all know how that maybe the most important topic nowadays in politics or in the world is the Russia-Ukraine war. So maybe you all have heard about that. There are a lot of information. So this conflict, to understand this conflict and to understand what is going on, it's totally necessary to understand how Russia and Europe are related and the relation between Russia and Europe. Otherwise, it would be almost impossible to understand the conflict now. And one thing that I would like to say is that maybe here in Thailand, maybe it seems that the conflict between Russia and Ukraine is quite far and it doesn't have a very big impact. But what I want to say with this presentation is that this conflict has more profound roots, and that is why it is not a local conflict in Europe. It's a conflict that involves much more. And also, I would like to emphasize that also maybe here in Southeast Asia or in other parts of the world, Russia is seen as a European country, so European power. So it may seem like that, but if we look through the history of Russia and also the geography of Russia, geopolitics, and how Russia is seen and sees itself, we can say that Russia is more than a mere European country. Russia is more what is called Eurasian country. That, yes, maybe it's closer historically to Europe, but Russia is in Europe and in Asia. That is why Russia itself sees not as a European country, but as Eurasian. And in this sense, since the very beginning of this century, so you all have seen the maps of Russia and you have seen the map of Asia. So you can see that there is China and then we have a very, very big space where is Russia. So we can see that most of North Asia occupies Russia, and most of the territory of Russia is in Asia. So that is why Russia, in the last 20 years, and especially when President Vladimir Putin came to the presidency to Russia, he announced Russia's turn to Asia, or Russia's shift to Asia. So one of the main goals since the very beginning of this century of Russia is to turn to Asia, not to be only in Europe, but in Asia. So that is why now that after this conflict, Russia will try to engage more in Asia, but it will not be something new, so it will be the continuation of something. So after these comments, I would like to begin to my presentation. So as you may have seen, we have 3 different topics. So the first topic will be a little bit bigger about Russia and Ukraine conflict. So I will try to, in the first part of the, so I will try to divide this into 2 parts. First, I would like to explain the roots of the conflict, I mean history, and then the second part of this presentation will be devoted to what is going on now and what we can expect in the future. And after the launch, we will have more, it will be more relaxed. So will be not only about politics, it will be about 2 interesting topics. First, about space. Well, we all have seen about Elon Musk and the new space projects. Well, I will try to talk about this because Russia and Europe, they are very much involved in the future of space cooperation. And in the end, the future of humanity will be in space. So that is why maybe could be seen like something that belongs to the future, but is closer than we think. And in the end, I will talk about one region that sometimes is forgotten, but that it's also very important for the world and for politics. That it's the Arctic, because in the Arctic, before it was only frozen land, but now it's becoming more important, and not only for Russia and other countries, but also for countries like Thailand and other countries in Southeast Asia. And this is because of the global warming. So after these general explanations, I will start with our first topic. So to understand the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, as I said, we should understand the relation between Russia and Europe. So I will try to explain with this, also with the help of literature. So maybe you will have heard about Fyodor Dostoevsky, that he is one of the most famous writers in Russia. So this is, I will quote what Fyodor Dostoevsky said. He said, Russia is not only in Europe, but also in Asia. The Russia is not only a European, but also an Asiatic. In our future destinies, Asia is, perhaps, our main outlet. We should not abandon Europe completely, nor is it necessary. Europe, even as Russia, is our second mother. We have taken much from her, and we shall again take. And we shall not wish to be ungrateful to her. So this Dostoevsky said that in the year 1881, 2 months before he died. So he was explaining that Europe is like a second mother to Russia, but also Russia should look to other parts of the world. So what Dostoevsky and in general Russian literature shows is that there always has been this dilemma in Russia of love and hate to Europe. So what Dostoevsky says is, okay, we are part of the European civilization, but also we are not only Europeans, but we are also Asians. So that is why we should look at other parts of the world, but not forgetting what is Europe to us. So to begin with, we all know that on February 24th of this year, the Russian President Vladimir Putin shocked the world, ordering a full-scale invasion to Ukraine. First, it thought to be a rapid conflict, but in the end it turned to be a long war that will have a huge impact on world affairs. So that is what I was saying, that it completely shocked the world, this invasion to Ukraine, but it's not only a local conflict, but it will have a huge impact in world affairs. So the content of this part of our discussion will be devoted to the introduction, then the determinants, so the basics to understand these conflicts, history. Then I will talk about the current situation. What is going on now, today, or yesterday, or tomorrow. And then I will try to talk about the perspectives for the future and what we can expect. So the keys to understand the conflict is that this conflict, as I said, is quite complex. First of all, this conflict is a civil war. So it's Russia against Ukraine and against other Russians. Why? Because a lot of people in Ukraine, they are ethnically from Russia. So when Russia attacks Ukraine, it's not attacking another country that is totally different. is attacking also part of its same nation. And many people in Ukraine have Russian passports. So in this sense, we can understand this conflict between Russia and Ukraine as a civil war. So a war between brothers, what we could say. Secondly, this is an invasion of one state to another state. So this is the second idea. It's about a war between states. And the third one is that this is a war between great powers. So in the end, also Ukraine is in the middle of a confrontation between Russia and the United States. So we should see this conflict as this. First of all, a civil war between more or less the same people. Then a war between two different states that for a long time they were part of the same country. And thirdly, it's a conflict that it comes from the Cold War, and it's a conflict that should be understood as Ukraine in the middle of a conflict between Russia and the United States, that they are like usually the major rivals in the world. So that's why I try to make this scheme to explain this conflict about how it's on the one hand is Russia, but the big other or the main other for Russia in this conflict is what is NATO, the North Atlantic Territorialization, and Ukraine is quite in the middle of this. So to understand that, we should see that it involves three different dimensions. First, a civil war. Secondly, an invasion, of course, one state to another, but also a confrontation between great powers. So, first of all, what is Ukraine? So if we have, Ukraine, it comes from the Russian word Ukraina. Ukraina in Russian means on the outskirts or on the periphery. So Ukraine historically was on the outskirts of the Russian Empire. It was like some sort of periphery of the Russian states. Not always was the same. In the very beginning, Kiev, that is the capital of Ukraine, was one of the first capital of the Russian Empire. But then, when the Mongols and Genghis Khan invaded Eastern Europe, the capital, or Kiev, was destroyed and the capital moved to Moscow. So since the 12th century, Moscow has been the capital or the center or the neurological center of Russia. So since then, since the 12th century until the year 1917, Ukraine was an inherent part of the Russian Empire. So almost during the whole history of Russia, Russian Empire, Ukraine was part of Russia. And it was not very different from Kiev, was not very much different than Moscow. So until the year 1917, Ukraine was completely part of Russia. Then in that year, it took place the Russian Revolution, when the Bolsheviks came to power in Russia, and Ukraine got some sort of autonomy. But still, Ukraine was one of the republics of the USSR. There were a couple of years when Ukraine was independent. It was the first time in history, but again it became part of the Soviet Union. So in the year 1922, it became part of the Soviet Union. So what can we say now? That the Ukraine became independent in the year 1991. And the borders of contemporary Ukraine were the borders of Soviet Ukraine. So when we see contemporary Ukraine, we can see that it was a territory to which some other territories were added. We can see here that the center of Ukraine, and historically where Ukrainians lived, people that speak Ukrainian, was the part in green. So we can see that part in green. So this is the core of Ukraine. And also the part that we see in yellow. Then we have, in the year 1922, that this part that is in pink was added. So Vladimir Lenin, who was the first leader of the Soviet Union, decided to give this territory to Ukraine as a gift. So that is why, if you have noticed, or if you have read the speech of President Putin in Russia, he's saying that Ukraine exists because of Vladimir Lenin. So he says that Lenin created Ukraine and that part of Ukraine. So, and if you can see now, for instance, we will see afterwards the map of the war, but if you see the part that now Russia has occupied of Ukraine is almost the part that is in pink. So almost that part is the one that Russia has occupied because for the Russian leadership, this was historically part of Russia. Even in Russia, it was called Novorossiya, that is like the new Russia. So historically, that part was Russia, and finally, that part that is on the western part, it was part of Poland. So this was a territory that never belonged to Ukraine and was gained by the Soviet leader Stalin. So Stalin, as you may have heard, when the Soviet Union won the Second World War, he tried to get as much as territory as he could. So he said, okay, let's include that part that historically was Poland, and now it became part of Ukraine. So we see now that when Ukraine became independent in the year 1991, it inherited the borders of the borders that the Soviet leaders gave to them, but still was quite a complex situation because half of that part was historically part of Russia. And that is now what we can see in the next slide. If we divide Ukraine between the people that speak Russian and speak Ukraine, so we can see how Ukraine is almost divided into two. So like the eastern part has been historically closer to Russia, and the western part, the western part has been historically closer to Europe, and the eastern part historically closer to Russia. So that is why when Ukraine became independent, it was kind of divided between east and west. So one part was closer to Europe, the other part was closer to Russia. And it continued to be like this. So from the year 1991, what happened in Ukraine is that it was like a pendulum. Sometimes closer to Russia, sometimes closer to European Union. But now maybe one of the main issues is that in spite of the fact that Ukraine was divided, it didn't become a federation. So if we see, the official name of Russia is the Russian Federation because it's composed by different entities and different republics. And Ukraine, instead of creating a federation that could include some regions that could have some autonomy, it decided to become just a simple nation and not a federation. So what we can see is after this pendulum took place for about 20 years, in the year 2013, there was a president of Ukraine called Yanukovych that he decided that he was going to move closer to Russia. So he said, okay, we don't want to be part of the European Union. Maybe it would be better for us to be closer to Russia. We don't know exactly which were the motivations for this president. Maybe he was bribed by Russia, maybe it was real. We don't know, but he was democratically elected. So he was the president, and as a president of Ukraine, he decided to move closer to Russia. So what happened then is that in February 2014, there was a coup d'etat that took out Yanukovych. So Yanukovych was ousted, and came some groups to power that were practically anti-Russian. So this was the beginning of the conflict. So there was a president that maybe he can be criticized, and like it or not, but was the democratic president of Ukraine, and there was a coup d'etat that was to a certain extent supported by especially the United States, and this president was taken out, and groups that were very, very much anti-Russian took power. So now we can finish this part. Okay, this was Ukraine until the year 2014. But what happened with Russia? So now we have what I want to explain is how Ukraine, Russia, and NATO, how they evolved to come to this conflict. About Russia, well, I will not explain very much now about Russian history, but as I was saying, maybe one of the questions that arises to you, or maybe you have thought at some point, is well, why Russia is that big? Well, Russia in the very beginning was another European state, but in the 16th century there was a Russian Tsar that was called Ivan IV or Ivan the Terrible. Maybe you have heard. So there are a lot of histories that he killed his son, and well, that he was that he enjoyed to be people being tortured and so on. So, but one of the, I don't know, like the virtues or the things that he did is that he started the conquest of the north of Asia for Russia. So at the same time that he was having these problems and troubles in Moscow or in the Kremlin, he launched a campaign to conquer the rest of North Asia. So what we can see is that this was the territory of Russia in the year, if you see, in the year 1505, and then in 150 years it took the whole territory almost of North Asia. So with Ivan the Terrible, and then within 100 years, Russia, from being Eastern European country, as now Ukraine is, or as Poland, it became this an immense country that we know now. So Russia became Russia because of this expansion that began with Ivan the Terrible in the 16th century. So to understand Russia, we should understand that Russia is not a simple European nation, because the 70% of its territory is in Asia, and it was conquered 5 centuries ago. And with Russia, well, what happened with Russia was that you all know that Russia was the main republic of the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union was mainly some sort of Russian empire. The Soviet Union collapsed in the year 1991, unexpectedly, and Russia became independent, Ukraine became independent, and another 15 republics. So what happened in Russia was that the 90s for Russia was maybe some of the worst periods in history, because Russia decided with President Yeltsin, Boris Yeltsin, so he decided to terminate the Soviet Union and to start market economy. So he did what China has been doing, for instance, in 30 years. He tried to do that in 1 month. So that is why Russia collapsed, the Russian economy collapsed. So that is why China, after what Russia did, China decided to try to become a market economy, but not following the way Russia did, because Russia tried to change from being a communist state to being a market economy just in 1 month. So that is why Russia was very weak. There was a very big crisis in Russia, and it became very close to the United States. As we can see in this picture, and Boris Yeltsin and Bill Clinton, they were like, at some meetings, there was the sense that they were kind of good friends, as we can see in this famous picture. But we can understand that in the 90s, Russia became very close to the United States, but at the same time, it was one of the worst periods in the history of Russia because of the crisis that came after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So if you ask any Russian how they lived in the 90s, they will say that it was the worst period that they have lived. So there was a lot of criminality, a lot of poor people, and so on. So that's why Russia see that period of the 90s as a shame, as a period where Russia was very weak. And then Boris Yeltsin, in the year 2000, decided to step out of the government and to give, not to give, but to put a new president. So he decided to step down, and he chose Vladimir Putin as the new president. So it was the year 2000. So we have seen a lot of time has passed since Vladimir Putin came to the president. So what happened now in Russia is that people now in Russia in their 30s, they haven't seen any other president other than Vladimir Putin. So that is why they are all like the Putin's generation, because they were born or they were raised when Putin was president. So Putin became president of the Russian Federation in the 31st of December of 1999. And after he became president, Russia started to grow and started to develop. So Putin brought the much desired stability to Russia. So on the one hand, but on the other hand, Putin always has Putin has reiterated a lot of times that the collapse of the USSR was a geopolitical tragedy of the 20th century, and he has said that in last week again. So he saw, not because he liked communism, and that is one mistake. I mean, he is not trying to bring back the Soviet Union or communism, but what he thinks is that the collapse of the Soviet Union was a tragedy because Russia at that time was a very powerful country, and when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia became a very weak country. So that is why he considers that was a tragedy, the collapse of the Soviet Union, not because he likes communism, but because he sees the USSR as one of the greatest periods of Russian power. That is why he said, whoever does not miss the Soviet Union has no heart, but whoever wants it back has no brain. So that is why what I was trying to say, that okay, we can bring back the Soviet Union, but it was a shame that it collapsed. So the goal of Putin was Russia to become again a great power. And between the years 2004 and 2014, Russia started to grow, and maybe in part because of the prices of oil and gas and hydrocarbons, but it's a fact that years are considered the best years in history of Russia, or at least in contemporary Russia. So, to understand why Putin has a lot of support in Russia, I mean, you can all see Putin. Maybe you like you don't like, but sometimes maybe you can ask, well, why Putin is the president of Russia and why he's supported by the majority of the population? Well, we can understand that because after Russia was very weak and Russia almost disappeared in the 90s, in the year 2000, it became again not only that people started to live better, but also Russia started to be more important in global affairs. So if you remember or if you see how the world looks like 50 years ago, Russia was not very important. So nobody talked about Russia. When I started to learn Russian or to study Russia, it was not very important, and now it became important. I mean, it could be because of good things or bad things. I mean, here why not to say, but Russia started to live much better. Russia became a very, a very peaceful country, because if you go to Russia, it's the Russian cities, especially St. Petersburg, maybe Moscow and other cities, but they are as any other European cities in terms of security, in terms of restaurants. So it became a very different Russia and very secure Russia. So that is why Putin is supported by still the majority of the Russian population. And one of the best examples for how this can be shown is this graphic. So usually when we talk about life expectancy, we see that life expectancy grows, usually. So you can see in South Asia, in Latin America, in North America, the life expectancy usually grows. What happened in Russia, that was when the Soviet Union collapsed, life expectancy decreased almost by 10%. So in the 90s, the life expectancy for men was about 56 years. So the life expectancy of Russian men were more or less similar to African countries. So that is why we can see to what extent Russia suffered a big crisis in the 90s. So this is, I think, is the best example. And then we can see how after the year 2001, 2004, it started to grow, and now it's more or less similar to other developed countries. But I mean, this is one of the main, how to say, like the main ways to show to what extent Russia was suffering a big crisis in the 90s. So here we have Ukraine, that was like a pendulum until the year 2014, and Russia that in the very beginning of the 90s was very weak, it started to become stronger. So what happened is that in the year 2014, we can see now that as Russia started to grow, Ukraine remained not in a very good shape. So what happened is that when the Soviet Union collapsed, the 15 republics that composed, that constituted the Soviet Union suffered a very big crisis. So it was like a crisis, and then they started to recover. So now, but like in the year 2020, all the countries of the former Soviet Union have had a better level of development, except Ukraine. So now also we can see that the case of Ukraine was not like a case of success. So Ukraine was the only country of the former Soviet Union that that lived worse than before the collapse of the Soviet Union. All the rest of the countries started to live better except Ukraine. So that is why also we should pay attention to this. I mean, it's not to justify anything, but we can also see that the elites in Ukraine and the government in Ukraine also was not very successful. So we have here now in the year 2014 that Russia was weak, started to develop, and Ukraine couldn't choose what to do, but still Ukraine was not developing as they would like. And what happened? So now we have Ukraine, we have Russia, and we have NATO. So maybe you have heard about NATO. It's about the alliance, a military alliance, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So what is NATO? NATO was created during the Cold War. So it was, since the very beginning, NATO was created against Russia. So since the very beginning, it's anti-Russian. So it was created against the Soviet Union. So as we see in the 19th, still before the end of the Cold War, we have the Soviet Union and the communist countries, and we have the capitalist countries. So NATO was that. NATO was created during the Cold War to counteract the Soviet Union, like to have some sort of balance. So what happened? So when the Soviet Union collapsed, when the Soviet Union not existed, when the Russian Federation became an independent country, Russia started to say, okay, but NATO was created because of the Soviet Union, but now there is no Soviet Union, so we don't see or we don't understand why you want to continue to with NATO. So Russians couldn't understand why NATO continued to exist after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this is the main problem now. That Russia said, okay, it was the Soviet Union, we have our military alliance, the other countries with the United States, you have your military alliance, but now we are not communism, and why this alliance that was created since the very beginning was anti-Russia still exists. So Russia, since the very beginning, started to see NATO as a threat. And we can see their expansion. So in the 90s, NATO was only Western Europe. And then in the year 2009, NATO started to expand and reach the border of Russia. So that's why when NATO started to become closer and closer to the Russian borders, the Russian President Vladimir Putin and the leadership of Russia started to see this as an existential threat. So in the year 2008, the Bush administration, so if you remember George Bush, that was the person that the president that invaded Iraq. So he started to talk with Ukraine and Georgia about joining NATO. So for Russia was okay. Other countries like Poland, Romania, as you can see. So if we can see, the countries that here joined NATO were kind of allies of Russia, but they were not part of the Soviet Union. So for Russia, the red line was when NATO started to invite to join NATO countries that were part of Russia or the Soviet Union, in this case Ukraine and Georgia. So Russia said, okay, we don't like this, that you are inviting to join NATO Poland or Eastern European states, but the red line was when NATO started to invite countries that were part of Russia or the Soviet Union. So that was the red line. So when the United States started to talk with Georgia and or Georgia about and Ukraine about joining NATO, it took place the war that maybe you have heard about. It was in 2008, the war between Russia and Georgia. So we can see here that Georgia is a small country. So if you see a map, you can see like Turkey and Russia, and there are three small states there: Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. So these three small states were part of Russia or the Soviet Union, and in the year 2008, Georgia started to has some intentions to join NATO. So Russia decided not to invade, but to take some. So Russia more or less did what now is doing with Ukraine. So there were two regions in Georgia that were historically different to Georgia, and these republics declared their independence, and Russia recognized their independence, and Russia occupied military Georgia, but for only 5 days. So Russia in 2008 made clear that Russia wouldn't like and wouldn't allow NATO to came to their borders and to invite countries that were part of the Soviet Union. So what happened now is that in the year 2014, maybe you have heard or you remember, so we have now that in 2014, the president that was democratically elected in Ukraine was ousted. To power came groups that were very, very much anti-Russia. So that is why Russia decided to respond, and what Russia did was it took Crimea. So what happened with Crimea? That when the Soviet Union, so Crimea historically was Russia. So Crimea, if you see Russian, if you read the Russian literature or Russian novels, a lot of the elites from Moscow or St. Petersburg, they like to rest in Crimea. You have then Yalta, you have then even Saint Stalin. So historically, Russia, it was part of Russia, Crimea, and it was one of the, well, maybe you know that Russia is a very cold country, and this part of this Crimea is the maybe the warmest place of Russia. So now in summer, everyone goes to Crimea. So what happened there is that, but Crimea, after Ukraine became independent, Crimea was part of Ukraine. So Russia and Ukraine agreed that there was going to be a Russian military base here. So here we see Sevastopol, Simferopol. So there was a Russian military base there. So when these anti-Russian groups came to power in the year 2014, what Russia did was immediately take Crimea. So they decided to do that first because 90% of the population was Russian or was supporting Russia, so it was a fact. So afterwards there was a referendum that maybe was not very legal or democratically managed, but it was real that people wanted to be part of Russia. So what Russia did is, okay, if these anti-Russian groups came to power, so the next stage maybe will be to become part of NATO, and then NATO will be here in Crimea, and our military base will be threatened. So that is why Russia decided to take Crimea. And also if we see, and this is also very important to understand, so when Russia took Crimea, there is no Crimea is separated from Russia. So Russia decided here to build a very expensive bridge. Maybe you have heard, maybe you have seen. So Russia decided to build a bridge, but still Crimea was connected to Ukraine. So that is why since 2014, Crimea or this island was very vulnerable. So since then, Russia was always fearing that at some point Ukraine could take back Crimea. So that is why if we now see the part that Russia has occupied this part of Ukraine, trying to connect what was Russia to Crimea, to make a corridor to be able to defend. So that happened in 2014. Russia took Crimea very quickly. Nobody expected that. I mean, nobody really. So one day, the world woke up and saw that, okay, Crimea is already Russian. So there was no war there. People was very, not peacefully, but it was between, so there was no casualties when it happened. But after that, it was when this rupture between Europe, United States, and the West with Russia started, because no one recognized that Crimea was part of Russia officially. But de facto, Crimea became part of Russia very quickly. So if you go now to Crimea, it's very much Russian, and that is a fact. I mean, it's not that. Now it could be different, but with the other parts of Ukraine. But Crimea, in that sense, was very much Russian. So people, in reality, wanted to become part of Russia, and Russia felt threatened, and that is why they took Crimea. And also, Russia decided, not the Russian military, but Russia decided to back some separatists in the regions of Lugansk and Donetsk, the Donbass. If we have heard now, this is the region that Russia is occupying and Russia is fighting every day. So, in the year 2014, well, with the support of Russia, they occupied this 50% of the region of Donetsk and Lugansk. So what we have is that after the year 2014, Russia started to control Crimea and also this small part of Ukraine that, as we have seen, historically was very much part of Russia or closer to Russia. So this is what we call now the Donbass. So what happened there? So in the year 2014, after Crimea's annexation, Europe and Russia and Ukraine decided to sit and discuss how they could solve the situation. So there was the so-called Minsk agreements. So the Minsk agreements said that this conflict should be solved by peaceful means. So the main goal of these agreements that were signed in the year 2015 is okay, Russia already took Crimea, Russia already took some part of eastern Ukraine, but try to at least not worsen the situation and in the end to solve this peacefully. But what happened there is that in Ukraine continue to conduct a lot of policies that were perceived very much anti-Russian. For example, Russian language was also an official language of Ukraine, so they decided that Russian language was not going to be official anymore. So all the monuments that were built in Soviet times, they were destroyed, and so there were policies that were very, very much anti-Russian, and still they were fighting in that region. So there was military fighting there, and that's a fact. So still was kind of a frozen conflict. What happened was that in 2019, President Zelensky, that maybe you have also seen of her now, so he became president. So before that, nobody knew who Zelensky was. So he was just he worked on the TV as a comic. So what he became president. But he's not a politician. I mean, he was working for TV shows like this stand-up people love, and in the year 2019 he became the president, and his government changed the constitution, and in the constitution of Ukraine was written that Ukraine should become at some point a member of NATO. So Ukraine started to get closer and closer, and also what happened is that during that time Ukraine started to receive a lot of support, military support from the United States. So the military of Ukraine started to be trained by the United States and by NATO. So since the year 2014, de facto NATO and United States started to somehow help Ukraine military. So that is why Russia started to feel threatened and started to criticize this situation when Ukraine said and agreed that it should be enshrined in the Ukrainian constitution that Ukraine should be part of NATO. And also, they said that he would never recognize Crimea as Russian, and that at some point Crimea should be brought back to Ukraine, no matter how. So by peaceful means or by military means, but Ukraine started to have some kind of aggressive policies. And what happened, and I will finish with these two slides, that so the question now is, well, if this happened in the year 2014, why Russia invaded Ukraine only in February 24th of this year? So, as we saw, because since the year 2014, Ukraine started to be more and more anti-Russian, and also Russia had its own problems. First, there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan in the year 2020 that maybe you have heard. So these small states in the Caucasus. There were also some protests in Belarus. Again, the coronavirus pandemic started. There was a new Russian constitution. And finally, maybe you have heard also about this opposition figure in Russia called Alexei Navalny. So he was very famous because he was poisoned by Novichok. Navalny, he became the most famous figure for the Russian opposition. So he was almost no one in the year 2014, but he started to do real politics, and he started to become very popular. And the most important thing, he started to travel all around Russia. So as we know, we have seen Russia is very big. It's almost like a big empire. So usually politicians do not visit the whole country. So what happened there is that Navalny started to do real politics and to be closer to the population. So that is why it started to be a problem from the Russian president and for Putin. And it became like the enemy number one of Putin, and that is why he was poisoned. Maybe you have heard this story about Navalny. He was poisoned, so he was taken out from Russia. He survived. He was in Germany. He kind of recovered, and he decided to come back to Russia. So he came back to Russia in January last year. When he came to Russia, when he arrived to the airport, he immediately was arrested and sent to kind of jail, and he is now still in jail. But when he came to Russia back, there were a lot of political meetings, saying against this. So I have been in Russia for myself. I have been in Russia for 8-9 years, and when Navalny came, there were really massive protests that I had never seen before. So really was a lot of people going to the streets. So in this sense, it seems very clear to Putin that Navalny should stay in jail. So that is why he came to Russia, and nobody still don't know. Nobody still doesn't know why he's in jail. I mean, everybody knows because he's against Putin, but nobody knows which are the charges or what the Russian government is accusing Navalny of. So he was jailed, and this triggered. It was like the beginning of massive repression in Russia, not in general terms. I mean, in Russia you can, because sometimes people ask, I mean, but if you are in Russia, can you say something about Putin or no? Okay, in Russia, if you are with friends or with people, you can speak freely, so everyone can say, and maybe 50% of the population don't like or whatever, but you cannot say it in the media, as in many parts of the world. So there were, the Russian government started to close a lot of the free media that still existed in Russia. So that is why, I think, and many people think that Russia decided to invade Ukraine only after Navalny was jailed. Because if Navalny Navalny had been free, it would have been a very big problem for Putin. So that is why these are my own thought that Russia decided to invade Ukraine only this year because before there had some issues that Putin has to deal with. And also because Putin, he can stay as much as he wants in the presidency, but he is not immortal. He is now 70 years old, and well, he will not be here in this world around for a long, long time. So that's why he decided to do now. Otherwise, afterwards, maybe will be problematic. So that is why when Navalny was jailed and all this happened, and Putin became much more powerful, and he, the Russian government started to. If you have followed the situation with Ukraine, maybe you started to notice that in November last year, a lot of news started to appear in media. So it was like for three months, we were reading or listening in the news that Russia wanted to invade Ukraine, that maybe Russia was going to attack Ukraine. Well, that was because in November, Putin decided to confront NATO. He made, or the Russian government in November made three main demands to NATO. The first demand that was there should be no more NATO expansion to the east, especially Ukraine and Georgia. Secondly, that NATO should withdraw all military infrastructure from Eastern European countries. And third, the explicit prohibition for the United States and NATO to install short and medium-range strategic weapons capable of targeting Russia. So, generally speaking, what Russia wanted is that at least no more NATO expansion here, and that NATO should take back the weapons or the military facilities that it put there in Eastern Europe. So these were the main claims from Russia. So the Russian government sent a letter to President Biden in Washington in November, and he said, okay, we are making these three demands. The United States and NATO, they answered, of course, they rejected the three demands, and that's why Putin decided to launch the invasion. So this is the context. I would like to finish with this part of the presentation now. I just wanted to put into context how Russia, or how we ended up in this war. So Russia in November claimed and demanded NATO. No more NATO expansion, and so what Russia wanted is a promise from the United States that they should not expand to the east. So what Russia wanted, some sort of written agreement, saying that, okay, we will not try to get closer to your border. Russia wanted something like this. And in the United States, they say that, okay, that is not your decision, because there are free countries that they should make their decision by themselves. So that is why they rejected that demand, and Russia started to behave more aggressively until it decided to invade Ukraine. So now we will make a break. We can continue.
เชิญรับประทานอาหารว่างกันเลยนะครับชากาแฟว่างครับ
So I will continue with the presentation. So I will try to present this topic in 45 minutes, and then I will be very happy to answer to your questions. I will be hoping. Well, you could hear also. So I will continue with my presentation, and then I will be happy to answer to your questions. Please start thinking about questions. So as I was explaining, okay, I wanted to explain what happened and put into context what happened before the start of this war. So now we are that Putin and the Russian government made some claims, some demands. They were rejected by the West, and that is why Russia decided to invade Ukraine. So what happened? On February 24th, President Putin, he announced at 5 a.m. in Russian time a special military operation. So that is the official name in Russia. They don't call it a war, so they call it like a special military operation. And it was announced that this military operation has 4 main goals. The first one is that Crimea should be recognized as Russian. Second, that Lugansk and Donetsk, I mean the republics that we saw in the map, should be recognized also as independent. The third, the demilitarization and densification of Ukraine. And fourth, the neutrality of Ukraine. So what in general Russia wanted was to Ukraine to recognize Crimea and the eastern part of Ukraine as independent, and that Ukraine should promise that it will remain neutral. So these were the main claims and the main reasons for Russia to go to war. And well, they put at the table these main demands so that to end this war. Of course, Ukraine didn't comply with these demands, and that is why the war. So since the very beginning, so maybe if you have been following the news, well, in the very beginning, Russia invaded Ukraine, but they invaded from the north and from the south. So we can see here that part, the north and the south. So if they invaded, one part was directed toward Kiev, and the other part was aimed to take the south of Ukraine. So it was like this. So what we should say is that the Russian population and elites were shocked. I mean, almost no one in Russia expected this to happen. It is said that even many people close to the government, they know that this war was going to happen, that it was kept secret. And so, including myself, I mean, I was living at the time in Russia, so I woke up shocked by the news that there were tanks toward Kiev. So nobody almost expected. So in the very beginning, the Russian population was in shock and didn't know what to think. Secondly, the U.S., the United States, had warned Ukraine and President Zelensky that this was going to happen. But it is said that Zelensky did not believe that. Third, and was real, that was Ukraine was better prepared than in 2014. So as we saw in 2014, Russia took very quickly Crimea and almost without using military force. So now, as I explained, Ukraine was helped, and the military was already trained and so on by NATO. So Ukraine was better prepared for this. What started to happen in the very first weeks of the war, that there was mass immigration from Russians to other countries as well. I mean, the refugees from Ukraine, but from within Russia, a lot of people started to go out, especially to Belgrade. Belgrade, Tbilisi in Georgia, and Yerevan in Armenia. So these were like the main, and Istanbul also. So if you go now to, especially to Belgrade, well, it's like a small Russia now, or in Istanbul, or in, but especially also in Armenia and Georgia. So what happened in the very first 2 weeks of the war was that everyone thought that there was only 2 options. Either Russia will defeat Ukraine rapidly, I mean Russia will end with the war, will defeat Ukraine very quickly, or the West with sanctions will defeat Russia. And none of this happened. So in Russia could not defeat Ukraine as fast as it wanted, and the war continues. But on the other hand, when the West started to sanction Russia, they found out that the Russian economy was not as weak as they thought. So generally speaking, in the West, they thought that the Russian economy was like a paper tiger, so very weak. So it turned to be not the case. So what happened? I mean, we're still trying to understand what happened, because it's what I want to say now is that we have just few information that we can trust. So that is now for the meantime. I mean, if you read the news in English, they are always talking about the invasion, and especially we're talking about Ukraine, supporting the position of Ukraine. If you see the Russian media, they are supporting Russia, but we don't have like very objective information or facts. So that is why now we are like blind, trying to understand what's really going on and which were the intentions in the very beginning. So what we can see, and we can, because the Russian experts especially, they say that Putin never wanted to take Kiev. So many people thought, okay, Russia and Putin wants to take the whole of Ukraine, but it wasn't the case, never was the case, because entering house-to-house battle in a city as large as Kiev, and with such a limited number of troops, would have resulted in a massacre. So let's remember that the Russian military forces in Ukraine, they are more or less 100,000, 150,000. So this is not enough to invade a country as big as Ukraine is more or less big as Thailand. So that is why, I mean, it's impossible. So it was since the very beginning some sort of limited operation. So what Russia wanted and Putin wanted is to provoke a coup d'etat in Ukraine. So what wanted is to, by attacking at the same time to the north and to the south, to force the Ukrainian government to go out of Ukraine and to put a government that could be closer to Russia. But it didn't happen. What happened is that the response from Ukraine was more forceful than expected, and therefore Russia had to rethink the strategy. So Russia attacked. Russia thought that it was going to be very easy, but Ukraine was much better prepared. So that is why the conflict didn't finish as soon as they expected. What happened is that after a month, Russia, so it was in the very beginning, Russia occupied the north and the south. And now what Russia did is they left all the northern part to focus on this part. So if you remember, this part was, as I showed, historically that part was closer to Russia. So historically that part was the Russian part of Ukraine. So that is why Russia decided to focus on this part. and to advance on eastern Ukraine. So now the next stage of the war is the fight for the Donbass. So Donbass is this eastern part of Ukraine. So what happened now? So what Russia is that there are no prospects for peace agreements in the near future. So neither Biden nor Putin or Zelensky want peace now. So Putin will not stop now. So Putin won't stop until Russia has occupied most of eastern Ukraine. Biden, he will not also retreat because it will be kind of a defeat for the United States. And Zelensky will not also concede because if he said, okay, we will give these territories to Russia, so he will be seen in Ukraine as a traitor. So there is no incentives for any of them to end the war. So that is why in the very beginning we thought that the war was going to finish in 2 or 3 weeks, and then we can see that it can take years. So what happened that Ukraine has accused Russian armed forces of war crimes, so we have seen this. So that is why the prospects of a peace agreement are more difficult. So if we saw in the very beginning, there were a lot of talks about a peace agreement in the very, very beginning. And now they are not talking about this peace agreement because, and this is partly because of these accusations of war crimes from the Ukrainian part. So now the United States and Europe, they are backing Ukraine military. And they have decided, I mean, if you see in the news or from political meetings, like the United States, Europe, and Russia and Ukraine, they have decided that the war will be decided in the battlefield. So there are almost no expectations that they will sit at the table and will decide to make a peace agreement. No, what will happen is that the war will continue and the country or the part that will have more power and more resources will win, and then everything will be decided in the battlefield. Unfortunately, that was, it seems to be the case. So, for the case of Russia, it's the victory is very much needed because otherwise, I mean, Putin cannot say, okay, we will retreat and everything what we have done now, okay, let's try to forget it. So it will not happen. And any territorial concessions made by Zelensky would be considered in Ukraine as a treason. So that is why there is no way, so it's a very, very difficult situation because there are no reasons for anyone to concede or to finish the war. So that is why many people are saying that if they continue to do that, the risk can be increased. And that is why people start to talk about the use of nuclear weapons, because they said, okay, if somehow the West, Europe, United States, and Ukraine manage to somehow defeat Russia, Russia will not concede so easily, so they could maybe tempted to use nuclear weapons. So now, so this is a picture of what we have now. So this is from 3 days ago. So now this is the situation. So if you see, what Russia is trying to do is, let me see. So to close this. So what they want to join this part and to take this part from Ukraine. So they are moving very, 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 very slowly, but they have been advancing. So as we can see, maybe in a couple of months, they will occupy. So the goal of Russia is to occupy this part, to close like the gaps, and to occupy all the eastern part of Ukraine. So as we can see, Russia has already occupied the southern part of Ukraine, and they now are. So it's kind of a very difficult and complex strategy. But all the southern part of Ukraine, they are started now to use the Russian ruble. They started to give passports to the people. So now here the question, and what we don't know is to what extent the population support the occupation. Because what we saw with Crimea is that the people that was living in Crimea, they supported and they wanted to be part of Russia. But now all this part of Ukraine that is being occupied, we don't know to what extent they want to be part of Russia. So it's a very risky game because generally speaking, they are more pro-Russian and closer to Russia, but we don't know to what extent. So it's a very risky game. If you see, videos in YouTube and so on, it seems that the regions are, the cities that are already occupied by Russia are more or less stable. They are peaceful, but we don't know very well, not especially what is going on, but what will happen. So it's a very risky game for Russia because now we are not in the 19th century when we can change populations so on and forth. So that is the basics. So for Russia, what will decide if Russia can win or not, if the population will accept to be part of Russia. And my guess is that they could, but also maybe because of the invasion and the violence, maybe they could be against. So theoretically, the people that live on that part of Ukraine would be happy or would like to be part of Russia, theoretically. But in the practice, we don't know. So what is going on now? It's an economic war against Russia. So we have heard of sanctions against Russia. Maybe you have heard. So before, sanctions were applied against, implemented against countries as Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, and so on. But now, the sanctions that have been implemented against Russia are unprecedented. So no one in history has been sanctioned as much as Russia is now. So for instance, now I will travel to Russia in a couple of months, and I have no idea with which kind of money, which kind of cars. So it's like a totally unknown place for Russians and for people like me that work there, because the cards. I have a Russian card that is not working here, and I have cards from other countries that are not working in Russia. So you cannot use your phone to pay. So there are many uncertainties. Now the question is, and one thing is that, as I said, okay, on the one hand, Russia thought that Ukraine was going to be defeated very quickly. So Russia said, okay, Ukraine is very weak, so we will defeat Ukraine. And Russia found out that it was not the case. On the other hand, when Europe and the United States started to sanction Russia, they thought that Russia was economically very weak and it was going to be a paper tiger and the Russian economy would collapse. But it didn't happen. So as we see now, the ruble fell sharply in the first month, but then now the ruble is at the level before, at the same levels that it was before the war. So generally speaking, the Russian economy was not as weak as everyone thought. As maybe you have heard or watched the news that now the inflation is in many countries in Europe and the United States are increasing. Now the inflation in the United States is the highest in the last decade, and and other countries, they are having problems because they thought that the Russian economy would collapse, but it didn't. And now the Russian ruble is is even better than before the war. So economically, Russia has been resisting and has been very successful in resisting. I mean, you cannot. If you had asked me before the war, what would happen if with these sanctions, I would say, okay, well, the Russian economy will not resist, but somehow it resisted, and we can see now and if you read even the critics or the politicians or the analysts that are usually against Russia, but they all agree that the Russian economy is doing much better than everyone thought. So for the Russian people, and this is the basics. So if the Russian economy would have collapsed, if the Russian economy had collapsed, the Russian leadership wouldn't have had the support. So Putin wouldn't have the support that he has now. So it's very essential for Russia to maintain certain stability. And what we are now witnessing is a new Cold War. So we can see, for instance, now the airspace close to Russian aircrafts. So now if you go, for instance, my case, if you go from Mexico to Russia, you have to do like a very strange flight because you cannot travel from Mexico to Russia because all this airspace is closed. So what is happening now is the situation now is worse than during the Cold War. For instance, during the 70s and the 80s, you could easily travel from Washington to the USSR. So even in the worst times of the Cold War, there was no such cases when you couldn't fly. So now the situation is much worse than what it was during the Cold War, and it will continue. So now if you want to travel from Russia to, for instance, this is, and it's not, for instance, from Russia to Mexico, Moscow to Cancun. So we can see which was the flight before and now what you had to do. So before it took from Moscow to Cancun 12.5 hours, and now it's taking 15. But here the thing is that it's not only for Russian aircrafts, also the Russian airspace is closed for European aircraft. So for instance, if you travel from Helsinki to Bangkok, you also have to do totally to avoid the Russian airspace. So before the flight from Helsinki to Bangkok took 10 hours and a half, and now it's taking almost 14 hours. So we have that, because Russia is quite a big country, also it is affecting European airlines. And also the case now is that many European airlines that travels, for instance, from the United States to China, they usually travel through the Arctic. So they did like this. So a lot of them, they cross Russian territory, and now they cannot cross. So now that is why we can see gradually how flight tickets from the United States to China, they are increasing. So we are gradually looking at witnessing how prices are increasing on both sides. For now, to go to Russia is very complicated. So now, if you want to go to Russia from Latin America, for instance, the only way is via Istanbul or Dubai. So, but also, if you want to travel from North America or Europe, you have to avoid Russian airspace. So now it's a very difficult situation for airplanes. And well, also we have a situation here. Maybe you have heard in recent days about the region of Kaliningrad, that it's being kind of blocked. So what happened is that maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but there is a small part of land, of Russian land in the middle of Europe. So Kaliningrad was formerly known as Königsberg. So Königsberg was the hometown of the great philosopher Immanuel Kant, that it happened to be born in now Russian territory. So Königsberg was one of the most important cities of Prussia. So when Prussia was taken and defeated, well, when Nazi Germany was defeated in the Second World War, Russia decided to took Königsberg and to depopulate Königsberg. So Königsberg was before German, totally German city. I mean, it was the city of Kant, and they decided to take this territory. But what happened is that after the USSR collapsed, Kaliningrad remained part of Russia. So now there is a Russian enclave in the middle of Europe. So that is why now, if you want to travel from, for instance, here St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad, before was very easy, but now you are surrounded by Poland, Lithuania, and Estonia, so you have to travel, but be very careful. I mean, not to cross Finland airspace, Estonian airspace, and then to Kaliningrad. So before the war, a flight from St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad was an hour and a half, and now it's 3 hours. But now the problem, if you have heard the news, is that Lithuania has decided. So now, I mean, the only way that you can travel is from Russia, I mean St. Petersburg to Kaliningrad, is or by airplane, or there is a railway that crosses the European Union. But now the European Union and Lithuania has decided that they will start to block some transit coming from Russia to Kaliningrad. So this is a very hot spot in the center of Europe, because this region of Kaliningrad almost completely depends from goods and other stuff coming from Russia. So this is a very hot spot, and well, a lot now is being said that Russia could escalate the situation there. The problem is that for Russia is that if Russia does so, I mean, what happened? Why NATO is not doing something or supporting Russia? Because NATO is not part of Ukraine, is not part of NATO. But if Russia does something, they're in Poland or Lithuania, so they are part of NATO. So if Russia does something on that part of Europe, they will surely trigger the Third World War. So what we see now is, okay, many, especially in the United States and Europe, they blame Russia for this war, and especially Putin. But the question is only Russia's fault or no? I mean, who is guilty or who is responsible for this war? So Jack Matlock, the former ambassador to the Soviet Union, so he was the last ambassador from the United States to the Soviet Union, he said that, well, we have aggressively attempted to detach Ukraine and Georgia from any substantial influence by Russia. By the way, if another country had done something similar to one of our neighbors, we would have reacted perhaps even more forcefully than President Putin has. So, what many people And for instance, in my case from Mexico, we thought, okay, what would happen if Mexico next year will invite the Chinese to put a military base in the northern Mexico? So the United States would accept that or no? So that is why when the United States says that, okay, it's the decision of Ukraine to join NATO or not, could be a little bit hypocritical, because the United States wouldn't accept that if another country would try to host some military base from China or from the Soviet Union. And the best example of this situation was the military crisis in Cuba in the year 1962. So if you remember, there was a big crisis in Cuba because Fidel Castro at that time was the president or the leader of Cuba, and they invited the Russians, the Soviets, to put some missiles, and the United States reacted and threatened to invade Cuba if the Soviet Union didn't take back the missiles. So it was almost the same situation that is going on now. So the case here is that we don't live in a perfect world. We live in a world that we have some sort of great powers that if they feel threatened, they will react aggressively. So we have United States, we have Russia, we have China, and we all know that, I mean, if some of these countries feel threatened by another great powers, they usually will react even by force. So now, what is going on? Okay, Europe and the United States have been sanctioning Russia, but Russia still has good relations with many parts of the world. Especially, we have here, for instance, Russia, China, India triangle. So we couldn't understand the Russian invasion without the kind of support of China, and also from India. So now, for instance, the Europeans tried to put an embargo on the Russian oil, but India now is buying the Russian oil. China is also buying the Russian oil. So for Russia, they know that, well, they have very good relations with India and China, and that is why these are the key issues to take into account. That the Western sanctions could be avoided by Russia by developing more economic ties with China and India. And also, we can see that other regions in the world, like Africa, they have been also kind of supporting Russia. So this picture, it was from a meeting from the head of the African Union that came to Russia to meet President Putin. So we have what we can see now in the next map is that which countries have sanctioned Russia in the world. So we have that only North America, the European Union, South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and Australia have sanctioned Russia. So when we listen that the international community has sanctioned Russia, well, maybe many countries in the world condemn this war, but sanctions have been implemented only by United States, Europe, and their Western allies. So that is why Russia feels kind of protected, because even if other countries don't support the war, they are not against Russia, so it's quite different. So what will happen now is that what is going on now in Russia is in Russia is taking place some sort of the Westernization. So now all the Western companies are abandoning Russia. And what Russia has decided is to forcefully end ties with the West. So what Russia is decided is to forcefully, end whatever ties it had with the West. What will happen? Well, it will have a very serious implication. So I want to show you this image. So for instance, this was a picture of McDonald's when it was opened in Moscow in the year 1990. So we can see how everyone went to McDonald's to buy burgers because it was something new. Then we have the picture of the same McDonald's. So I am showing 4 different pictures to see you the changes. So this is the year 1990, the first McDonald's. Then we have the year 2020, the same McDonald's, still in Russia. Then we have April 2022, McDonald's is closed. And then we have in June 2020, the new inauguration of Kuzma Tochka. So now in Russia they started to inaugurate the replacement of McDonald's. So if you see here, what is written here in Russian is that names can be changed